December 3, 1943. The Pacific Ocean, 200 miles east of the Marshall Islands. The USS Wahoo slices through charcoal waters under a moonless sky. In the submarine's cramped control room, Lieutenant Commander Griffith Harrison grips the periscope handles so tightly his knuckles turn white. Through the lens, the silhouette of a Japanese destroyer emerges from the darkness, a perfect target. He gives the order in a voice barely above a whisper. Fire torpedoes 1 and 2. The torpedoes launch with a shuddering hiss. 30 seconds pass. A minute. Nothing. The Japanese destroyer continues its patrol, oblivious to the attack. Harrison's jaw clenches. This has happened before. Too many times. In the last 9 months, his submarine has fired 27 torpedoes at enemy vessels. Only 4 have detonated as designed. His superiors at Pearl Harbor insist nothing is wrong with the torpedoes. The fault, they claim, must lie with the submarine commanders. Harrison makes a decision that will violate direct orders from the Bureau of Ordnance. He turns to his executive officer and speaks in a low, determined voice. When we return to Midway, we're fixing these torpedoes ourselves. I don't care what Buord says. He couldn't have known that this act of calculated disobedience would expose a catastrophic flaw in America's primary submarine weapon and lead to an engineering revelation that would transform the silent service from ineffective to lethal. No one in the 21st Submarine Division knew that one officer's defiance would rewrite the rules of undersea warfare and turn the vast Pacific into a deadly trap for Japanese shipping. Griffith Harrison grew up in the coastal town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, where fishing trawlers and schooners dotted the harbor. Born in 1910 to a shipbuilder father and schoolteacher mother, young Griffith spent his childhood watching vessels of all kinds navigate the temperamental Atlantic. By age 12, he could tie every nautical knot in his father's manual and recite the mechanics of diesel engines that powered the newer boats in the harbor. Their modest 2-bedroom home overlooked the shipyard where his father worked, and the constant rhythm of hammers and saws became the soundtrack of his youth. Winter evenings were spent around the kitchen table, where his father would sketch boat designs on the backs of old envelopes, while his mother graded papers by lamplight. Money was always tight in the Harrison household, especially after the stock market crash of 1929, but education was non-negotiable. Griffith's parents scraped together enough to send him to the local community college, where he excelled in mathematics and engineering. When asked why he eventually applied to the Naval Academy, Harrison would later tell a reporter from the Boston Globe, "The ocean was in my blood, and I wanted to serve something larger than myself." His acceptance to Annapolis in 1929 came during America's darkest economic hour, providing not just opportunity, but financial stability for a young man from a working-class background. At the Academy, Harrison quickly distinguished himself in tactical exercises and underwater physics. His classmates nicknamed him the Calculator for his ability to solve complex trigonometry problems in his head, a skill that would later prove invaluable when calculating torpedo trajectories under pressure. He graduated 7th in his class of 541 midshipmen in 1933, at a time when the Navy was beginning to recognize the strategic importance of submarine warfare. His first posting was aboard the USS S-38, one of America's older S-class submarines, where he learned the claustrophobic reality of undersea operations. The stale air, the perpetual dampness, the crushing pressure of ocean depths, these conditions molded Harrison into the sort of officer who prized practical solutions over theoretical perfection. After 3 years, he transferred to the newer Porpoise-class submarines, where he served as navigation officer under Commander Vernon Armstrong, a legendary submarine tactician. Armstrong became Harrison's mentor, teaching him that a submarine commander's most valuable asset wasn't the vessel's weapons, but his own judgment. "Hardware fails, Harrison," Armstrong would say during late-night conversations in the officers' mess. "Your mind mustn't." By 1941, Harrison had risen to executive officer on the USS Gudgeon. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, he was at sea on a training exercise. Returning to a harbor filled with burning wreckage and oil-slicked waters, Harrison witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of American unpreparedness. 3 weeks later, he received orders to take command of the USS Wahoo, one of the new Gato-class fleet submarines that would form the backbone of America's Pacific submarine force. The Wahoo's crew initially viewed their new commander with skepticism. At 33, Harrison was younger than many submarine commanders, and his quiet, methodical demeanor contrasted with the boisterous leadership style they had come to expect. Some mistook his thoughtfulness for hesitation. That perception changed during their first patrol in the Sea of Japan, when Harrison maneuvered the Wahoo through a minefield using a mathematical formula he developed to predict mine patterns based on current flows and geographical features. The crew started calling him the Wizard behind his back, a nickname that eventually reached his ears but that he never acknowledged. What none of them realized was that Harrison would soon face a challenge no formula could solve, a problem buried deep within America's most sophisticated undersea weapon. He had no idea that soon, those mathematical instincts would be all that stood between success and disaster in the vast killing grounds of the Pacific. By early 1943, the Pacific War had evolved into a desperate struggle for control of sea lanes and island bases. After the decisive American victory at Midway in June 1942, the strategic initiative had shifted. The Japanese Empire, once seemingly unstoppable, found itself increasingly on the defensive, yet the Empire of Japan still controlled vast territories across the Pacific, from the Aleutian Islands in the north to the Solomon Islands in the south, from the Philippines in the west to the Marshall Islands in the east. America's strategy for defeating Japan hinged on a two-pronged approach: island-hopping amphibious assaults, led by the Marine Corps to establish forward air bases, and a submarine campaign aimed at strangling Japan's maritime supply lines. As an island nation, Japan relied entirely on seaborne transport to move raw materials, fuel and food between its home islands and its far-flung conquests. This dependency created a strategic vulnerability that American planners were eager to exploit. The Imperial Japanese Navy had constructed a defensive perimeter consisting of heavily fortified island bases arranged in concentric rings around the Japanese homeland. This island chain defense strategy was designed to exhaust American forces before they could threaten Japan itself. Breaking through this defensive perimeter would require enormous sacrifices in blood and material. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, the Chief of Naval Operations, recognized that submarine warfare offered a way to bypass these island fortresses and strike directly at Japan's economic lifeline. Japan's merchant marine, the commercial fleet that transported oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, and rice from Formosa, represented a target that couldn't hide behind concrete bunkers or anti-aircraft guns. By January 1943, King had directed that submarine warfare against Japanese shipping should be America's top naval priority in the Pacific. The mathematics of this strategy were compelling. Japan started the war with approximately 6 million tons of merchant shipping. American analysts calculated that sinking 3 million tons would create critical shortages throughout the Japanese war economy. The Imperial Japanese Navy had limited anti-submarine warfare capabilities, with outdated depth charges and primitive sonar equipment. On paper, America's newer fleet submarines, faster, deeper diving, and equipped with the Mark 14 torpedo, should have been able to devastate Japanese shipping with minimal losses. But reality told a different story. In the first year of war, American submarines sank only 213 Japanese vessels, far below the rate needed to cripple Japan's economy. The Pacific Fleet Submarine Force, comprising 36 operational submarines by March 1943, was failing to meet expectations. Military planners had anticipated that submarines would account for 60% of Japanese shipping losses. The actual figure was closer to 15%. The human cost was also mounting. By early 1943, 15 American submarines had been lost with all hands. Each 78-man crew represented an irreplaceable collection of specialized skills and experience. Training a submarine crew took 18 months, time the Navy couldn't spare in the middle of a global war. At the highest levels of the Navy, concern grew into alarm. Admiral Charles Lockwood, recently appointed as Commander Submarine Force Pacific Fleet, COMSUPPAC, called an emergency conference of submarine commanders at Pearl Harbor on February 15, 1943. The meeting took place in a concrete bunker 10 feet below ground level, with armed Marines guarding the entrance. Inside, 23 submarine commanders sat in folding chairs arranged in semicircles. Lockwood stood before them, his face grave. "Gentlemen," he began, "our performance against Japanese shipping is unacceptable. Either we're doing something fundamentally wrong, or our equipment isn't functioning as designed. I want your honest assessment, without fear of career repercussions. What's happening out there?" The room fell silent for several seconds. Then Commander Harrison stood up. "Sir, it's the torpedoes. They're running too deep, and when they do hit, they often fail to explode. The Mark 14 torpedo and its Mark 6 exploder mechanism are fundamentally flawed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Other commanders rose to share similar experiences: torpedoes passing harmlessly under targets, premature detonations, or torpedoes striking ships with audible clangs but failing to explode. Lockwood listened intently, taking notes on a small pad. When the last commander had spoken, he closed his notebook and addressed the room. "Your observations match reports I've been receiving since taking command. The Bureau of Ordnance insists the torpedoes are fine, and that the problems must be with targeting and maintenance. I'm initiating a series of tests to settle this question once and for all." What Lockwood didn't mention was that challenging the Bureau of Ordnance, a powerful fiefdom within the Navy's bureaucracy, would be like declaring war on a second front. The men and the reputations behind the Mark 14 torpedo would not admit failure easily, even as American submarines and their crews paid the price in the waters of the Pacific. As the conference adjourned, Commander Harrison approached Lockwood privately. "Admiral, we can't wait for official tests. My crew and I have already started modifying our torpedoes. We've adjusted the depth settings and tinkered with the magnetic exploder. It's not authorized, but it's keeping us alive." Lockwood studied Harrison carefully before responding. "I didn't hear that, Commander, but if your approach yields results, find a way to let me know without putting it in an official report." What neither man realized was that the coming confrontation between submarine commanders and the Bureau of Ordnance would reshape the course of the Pacific War, turning America's silent service from frustration to lethal efficiency, and setting the stage for one of the greatest engineering improvisations in naval history. By April 1943, the frustration among submarine commanders had reached a breaking point. The USS Wahoo under Commander Harrison had just returned from its fourth war patrol with dismal results. 15 torpedoes fired, only 2 confirmed hits. The technical issues with the Mark 14 torpedo could no longer be ignored, despite the Bureau of Ordnance's continued insistence that the weapon was functioning properly. The Mark 14 torpedo represented a significant investment for the Navy. Development had begun in 1931, at the height of the Great Depression, with a price tag of $10,000 per torpedo, equivalent to the cost of 5 new automobiles. The weapon was designed to be the Navy's primary submarine-launched torpedo, replacing the older Mark 10. Its specifications were impressive: 21 feet long, carrying a 500-pound explosive warhead, with a range of 4,500 yards at 46 knots. What made the Mark 14 special was its sophisticated Mark 6 magnetic exploder mechanism. Unlike contact detonators that required a direct hit, the magnetic exploder was designed to sense a ship's magnetic field and detonate the torpedo as it passed beneath the target's keel, theoretically breaking the ship's back with the pressure wave from the underwater explosion. This approach was particularly valuable against armored warships whose hulls might withstand a direct hit. Harrison and other submarine commanders had discovered 3 critical flaws with the Mark 14. It ran approximately 10 to 15 feet deeper than set, causing it to pass harmlessly beneath targets. The magnetic exploder often detonated prematurely or not at all, and the backup contact detonator frequently failed even on direct hits, particularly at the ideal 90-degree angle of impact. Most disturbing was the Bureau of Ordnance's response to these field reports. Rather than acknowledge potential design flaws, Bureau officials consistently blamed submarine commanders for poor targeting, improper maintenance, or unrealistic expectations. The Bureau had invested significant prestige in the Mark 14's development and was institutionally incapable of admitting error. On April 28, 1943, Harrison made a decision that violated direct orders. Following a frustrating patrol in which 7 perfectly aimed torpedoes failed to detonate against a Japanese tanker, he ordered his torpedo officer, Lieutenant Wallace Gruber, to disassemble and inspect one of their remaining Mark 14 torpedoes. This action directly contravened Buord's instructions that submarine crews were forbidden from modifying torpedoes or tampering with the sealed Mark 6 exploder mechanism. Gruber spent 36 hours meticulously examining every component of the torpedo in the submarine's cramped torpedo room. What he discovered confirmed Harrison's suspicions. The depth control mechanism had been calibrated using test torpedoes without warheads. The addition of the warhead's weight in operational torpedoes caused the weapon to run significantly deeper than indicated by the settings. Additionally, the contact detonator's firing pin, a critical component, was too brittle and often shattered upon impact rather than triggering the detonation sequence. Harrison documented these findings in his personal journal, not daring to include them in official reports. Instead, he began implementing unauthorized modifications to the Wahoo's remaining torpedoes. The depth settings were adjusted to run shallower than the intended target depth, compensating for the systematic error. For the contact detonator, Harrison approved a modification that strengthened the firing pin using material salvaged from a damaged propeller blade. Word of these unauthorized modifications spread through the submarine force via an informal network. Commanders exchanged information during brief overlaps in port, passing handwritten notes with technical details and performance results. By June 1943, at least 7 submarine commanders had implemented similar modifications to their torpedoes, all while maintaining the fiction in official channels that standard procedures were being followed. Admiral Lockwood, meanwhile, had initiated official tests at the submarine base in Albany, Australia. Torpedoes were fired at suspended nets at various depth settings, providing incontrovertible evidence that the weapons were running deeper than set. Armed with this data, Lockwood confronted the Bureau of Ordnance directly, finally forcing an acknowledgement of the depth control problem. Buord reluctantly issued a fleet-wide modification order for the depth-setting mechanism in late June. However, they continued to defend the magnetic exploder, insisting it would prove effective once the depth issue was resolved. Lockwood, growing increasingly impatient with Buord's intransigence, finally took matters into his own hands in August 1943. He ordered all submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet to deactivate the magnetic exploders entirely and rely solely on the contact detonator, a direct challenge to Buord's authority. The final breakthrough came in September 1943, when Harrison and Gruber made a discovery that would revolutionize the submarine force's effectiveness. While examining a captured Japanese aircraft that had been shot down near Midway, they noticed something unusual about its propeller. It was constructed of a lightweight aluminum alloy that retained strength while reducing weight. Harrison immediately recognized the potential application for torpedo firing pins. Working with the machine shop aboard the submarine tender USS Sperry, Harrison and Gruber designed a new firing pin for the Mark 14's contact detonator, using salvaged Japanese aircraft parts. The lighter, stronger pins eliminated the failure mode that had plagued the original design. When installed in modified torpedoes and tested against a derelict Japanese freighter captured near the Marshall Islands, the results were dramatic. 7 out of 8 torpedoes detonated as designed. Harrison documented the modification in detail and sent the specifications directly to Admiral Lockwood via secure courier, bypassing the normal chain of command. Lockwood immediately recognized the value of the innovation and ordered the submarine tender's machine shops at Pearl Harbor, Midway, and Brisbane to begin mass-producing the modified firing pins for distribution throughout the fleet. The Bureau of Ordnance, faced with overwhelming evidence of the Mark 14's deficiencies and the success of field-implemented solutions, finally relented. In November 1943, Buord issued a comprehensive modification order incorporating the depth-setting correction. deactivation of the magnetic exploder, and replacement of the contact detonator's firing pin with the improved design pioneered by Harrison and Gruber. The impact on submarine operations was immediate and dramatic. In December 1943, American submarines sank 63 Japanese vessels totaling 127,000 tons, more than double the monthly average from earlier in the year. The percentage of torpedoes that hit and detonated rose from less than 20% to nearly 60%. The submarine force had transformed from an underperforming asset to the most efficient ship-killing weapon in the Pacific Fleet. As 1944 began, Japanese shipping faced a mortal threat that their naval planners had not anticipated. The vast Pacific, once a defensive buffer protecting Japan's maritime lifelines, had become a hunting ground where American submarines lurked unseen, armed with weapons that now functioned as their designers had intended. The hunter had found its teeth, and all because one submarine commander dared to disobey orders and trust his own judgment over bureaucratic certainty. 0500 hours, February 10th, 1944. The USS Wahoo cruises silently 20 feet below the surface of the Philippine Sea. In the control room, Commander Harrison studies the plotting table where pencil marks track a Japanese convoy's progress across a grid-marked chart. Intelligence from codebreakers at Pearl Harbor had placed this convoy, 3 cargo ships and 2 destroyer escorts, on a course from Manila to Truk, carrying aviation fuel and replacement aircraft parts for the Japanese naval base. Hydrophone effect, the sonar operator calls out, his voice barely above a whisper despite the excitement it contains. Multiple screws, bearing 045, range approximately 8,000 yards. Harrison nods. Helm, make your depth 60 feet. All stop. He turns to his executive officer. XO battle stations torpedo. The alarm sounds, a series of sharp buzzes that sends men scrambling to their stations throughout the submarine. In the torpedo room, crews prepare 4 forward tubes, loading them with Mark 14 torpedoes, now modified with the improved firing pins and correct depth settings. Harrison raises the periscope for a quick sweep of the horizon. Dawn is breaking, casting a pale golden light across calm seas. Perfect conditions. He spots the convoy silhouetted against the brightening eastern sky, 5 distinct shapes moving in a staggered formation at approximately 12 knots. Down scope, he orders, not wanting the periscope's wake to alert the Japanese lookouts. Helm, make your course 035, all ahead 1/3. We'll get ahead of them and set up for a submerged attack from their port side. For the next 45 minutes, the Wahoo maneuvers into position, a deadly predator stalking its prey. The tension in the control room is palpable. Every man aboard knows that the success of this attack depends not just on their skill and courage, but on whether their torpedoes, the submarine's only offensive weapon, will function as designed. Harrison consults the torpedo data computer, a mechanical calculator that determines firing solutions based on target course, speed, and range. The mathematics of submarine warfare are unforgiving. A 1-degree error in targeting can mean the difference between a hit and a miss at 1,000 yards. He double-checks the calculations himself, applying the mental corrections that experience has taught him. Up scope, he orders as they reach the attack position. The periscope rises with a hydraulic hiss. Harrison sweeps it in a full circle before focusing on the approaching convoy. The lead ship is a Maru-class cargo vessel, approximately 7,000 tons riding low in the water, an indication of a full cargo hold. Range to lead target 2,000 yards, he announces. Angle on the bow, port 45. Speed 12 knots. He pauses, watching the convoy's progress for a few more seconds. Final bearing and shoot. Set torpedoes to run at 12 feet, he orders, knowing that the actual depth will be roughly 14 feet due to the residual error that could never be fully eliminated from the depth mechanism. For a cargo ship with a draft of 25 feet, this will place the explosion directly beneath the keel, exactly where it will do the most damage. Tubes 1 through 4 ready, sir, reports the torpedo officer. Harrison takes one final look through the periscope, confirming the firing solution. Fire 1. A sudden jolt rocks the submarine as compressed air propels the torpedo from its tube. Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. Each launch comes 30 seconds after the previous one, spreading the torpedoes to maximize the chance of a hit. All fish running hot, straight and normal, reports the torpedo officer, monitoring the weapon's magnetic signatures as they speed toward their targets. Harrison keeps his eye glued to the periscope, tracking the bubbling wakes of the torpedoes as they race toward the unsuspecting convoy. 1 minute passes. 2 minutes. The mathematical certainty of the torpedo data computer says the first torpedo should hit in 10 seconds. First impact in 3, 2, 1. A massive explosion erupts beneath the lead cargo ship, lifting its midsection out of the water before it crashes back down, already breaking apart. 8 seconds later, a second explosion rocks the second ship in the convoy. The third torpedo misses, passing between 2 targets. The fourth strikes the third cargo ship directly amidships, breaking it in half. 3 torpedoes fired, 3 detonations, 2 ships sinking rapidly, and a third mortally wounded. Just 6 months earlier, such results would have been unthinkable. The Japanese destroyer escorts react immediately, changing course to charge toward the visible torpedo wakes. Harrison orders the Wahoo deep, taking the submarine down to 200 feet as the Japanese warships pass overhead, dropping depth charges that explode with bone-jarring concussions but cause no serious damage. After 4 hours of evasive maneuvering, the Wahoo surfaces to find the Japanese escorts gone, likely accompanying the one surviving cargo ship to its destination. Through the periscope, Harrison observes 2 oil slicks and scattered debris, all that remains of 7,000 tons of vital war supplies that will never reach Japanese forces. In the submarine's cramped wardroom that evening, Harrison writes in the patrol log, 3 confirmed kills with 4 torpedoes fired, Mark 14 torpedoes functioning as designed for the first time since war began. Modifications to firing pin and depth settings proving 100% effective. What Harrison doesn't record is his personal satisfaction at having defied the Bureau of Ordnance's insistence that nothing was wrong with the torpedoes. The proof is in the patrol results. Since implementing the unauthorized modifications, the Wahoo's success rate has increased from less than 20% to over 75%. The difference between failure and decisive victory in the silent war beneath the Pacific. Similar scenes were playing out across the vast Pacific theater as modified torpedoes transformed America's submarine force into the most lethal threat facing Japanese shipping. By mid-1944, American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant vessels faster than they could be replaced. The mathematics of attrition had shifted irreversibly in America's favor, creating a stranglehold on Japan's maritime supply lines that would only tighten as the war progressed. The human dimension of this technological breakthrough cannot be overstated. For submarine crews who had risked their lives repeatedly only to watch perfectly aimed torpedoes fail, the improved weapons restored confidence and morale. The psychological impact of knowing their primary weapon would function as designed allowed submarine commanders to plan more aggressive tactics, taking calculated risks that had previously seemed unjustifiable. For the Japanese, the sudden effectiveness of American torpedoes created a crisis that had no solution. With limited anti-submarine warfare capabilities and dwindling resources, they were forced to implement desperate measures. Convoy routes were pushed closer to shorelines. Merchant ships were armed with anti-aircraft guns that were useless against submerged threats. And destroyer escorts were stretched thin, trying to protect too many convoys across too much ocean. By August 1944, the monthly tonnage of Japanese shipping sunk by American submarines had reached 250,000, an unsustainable loss rate that was rapidly dismantling Japan's ability to supply its far-flung military forces and maintain its war economy. The silent strangling of Japan's maritime lifelines had begun in earnest, all because a submarine commander named Harrison had dared to question official doctrine and implement an unauthorized modification to a weapon that the Bureau of Ordnance insisted was functioning perfectly. While Harrison's name would never appear in official histories of the torpedo modifications, the Navy preferred to credit the institutional process rather than acknowledge that a field officer had exposed critical flaws in their premier weapon. His impact on the submarine force's effectiveness was undeniable. The ripple effects of his decision would be felt not just in the Pacific campaign, but in the transformation of naval warfare itself. July 7, 1944. Admiral Charles Lockwood sits behind his desk at Submarine Force Pacific Headquarters in Pearl Harbor, reviewing the latest patrol reports. The statistics are remarkable. American submarines have sunk 127 Japanese vessels in the past month alone, more than in the entire first year of the war. The tonnage lost represents nearly 10% of Japan's remaining merchant fleet, destroyed in just 30 days. A knock at the door interrupts his reading. "Enter," he calls. A young officer steps in, salutes, and places a folder on Lockwood's desk. "The Bureau of Ordnance's official report on the Mark 14 torpedo modifications, sir. They've completed their analysis." Lockwood raises an eyebrow. 2 years after we identified the problems in the field. Better late than never, I suppose." He opens the folder and skims the contents. The report acknowledges the depth-setting error, the issues with the magnetic exploder, and the flawed contact detonator. It recommends fleet-wide implementation of the same modifications that submarine commanders had been making unofficially for months. The same changes that BUORD had initially dismissed as unnecessary. What the report doesn't mention is the bureaucratic resistance that had cost American lives and delayed the submarine force's effectiveness by at least 18 months. There is no acknowledgement that field commanders like Harrison had been right all along, or that their unauthorized modifications had preceded the official solutions. Lockwood closes the folder and sighs. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That will be all." After the officer leaves, Lockwood pulls a different folder from his desk drawer, a confidential assessment of the submarine campaign's impact on Japan's war-making capacity. The analysis is striking. Japanese oil imports have fallen by 60%, steel shipments by 45%, and food deliveries to the home islands by 30%. Factory production across Japan is declining due to raw material shortages. Military units throughout the Pacific are reporting critical supply deficiencies. The submarine campaign, now equipped with functioning torpedoes, is achieving precisely what strategists had envisioned: the systematic strangulation of Japan's maritime supply lines. The vast Pacific, once Japan's protective moat, has become a deadly trap where American submarines hunt with near impunity. Lockwood makes a note in the margin of the report. "Ensure Commander Harrison receives the Navy Cross for his patrol results." No mention of torpedo modifications in the citation. It's a small acknowledgement of Harrison's role in transforming the submarine force's effectiveness, disguised as recognition for combat success. The institutional Navy was not ready to publicly admit how a field commander's defiance had overcome a critical design flaw that the Bureau of Ordnance had refused to acknowledge. For Harrison and the crew of the WWII, the remainder of 1944 would bring 4 more successful war patrols, resulting in the confirmed sinking of 11 Japanese vessels, totaling over 50,000 tons. Their success was mirrored across the submarine force as the improved Mark 14 torpedoes transformed America's undersea fleet from frustration to lethal efficiency. The human cost of the torpedo scandal can never be fully calculated. How many American submariners died because their primary weapon failed to function as designed? How many opportunities to shorten the war were missed during the 2 years when torpedo performance was abysmal? These questions haunted the survivors long after the war ended. For the Japanese, the sudden effectiveness of American torpedoes created an insurmountable crisis. By early 1945, merchant shipping between the home islands and outlying territories had decreased by 80%. Japanese garrisons throughout the Pacific were isolated, unable to receive reinforcements or supplies. Industrial production in Japan had collapsed to less than 40% of pre-war levels due to raw material shortages. The strategic impact was decisive. Japan's island defense strategy depended on the ability to move forces and supplies throughout their conquered territories. The submarine campaign's success in cutting these maritime lifelines meant that each isolated garrison had to fight alone, without hope of reinforcement. American forces could bypass heavily defended islands, leaving their garrisons to wither without supplies, while concentrating forces against strategically important targets. By the time the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan was already economically defeated, its industries paralyzed, its military fragmented, and its population facing starvation. The submarine campaign, made effective by the persistence of commanders like Harrison, who refused to accept weapon failures as inevitable, had created the conditions for Japan's collapse even before the first B-29 bombers reached the Japanese home islands. In the final analysis, America's submarine force, comprising just 2% of naval personnel, accounted for 55% of all Japanese shipping losses in World War II. This extraordinary achievement became possible only after the torpedo problems were solved, largely through the initiative of field commanders who trusted their own observations over official doctrine. The lessons of this episode extended far beyond World War II. The torpedo scandal highlighted the danger of institutional resistance to acknowledging failure, the critical importance of field testing weapons under combat conditions, and the value of empowering frontline commanders to solve problems rather than merely report them up the chain of command. For Harrison, the war's end brought a bittersweet recognition of his contributions. The Navy, still reluctant to publicly acknowledge the torpedo scandal, awarded him the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat, without mentioning his role in identifying and correcting the Mark 14's flaws. He was promoted to captain and given command of a submarine squadron, where he emphasized realistic testing and technical innovation as core values. In 1947, Harrison left active duty to pursue a career in engineering, applying the problem-solving skills he'd developed during the war to civilian technologies. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, and when he did, he focused on the courage of his crew rather than his own actions in challenging the Bureau of Ordnance. When interviewed for an oral history project in 1972, Harrison offered a simple reflection on the torpedo scandal. We had a choice between following procedures that weren't working or finding solutions that would keep us alive and help us win the war. It wasn't really a choice at all. The mark of true heroism is not always found in dramatic acts of physical courage. Sometimes it lies in the quiet determination to solve problems that others refuse to acknowledge, to trust observation over authority when lives are at stake, and to take personal responsibility for fixing systems that have failed. Griffith Harrison exemplified this kind of heroism, not in a single moment of glory, but in the persistent pursuit of a solution that transformed America's ability to fight and win in the Pacific. As we reflect on the untold stories of World War II, we might ask ourselves, would you have had the courage to defy orders and risk your career to fix a broken weapon, knowing that lives depended on your success? Would you have trusted your own observations when authorities insisted you must be wrong? Would you have taken action when inaction seemed safer for your career but deadlier for your comrades? These questions remain relevant today in military contexts and beyond. The legacy of commanders like Harrison reminds us that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against external enemies but against institutional resistance to acknowledging and fixing failures. The next time you read about American submarines in World War II, remember that their eventual success depended not just on the bravery of their crews, but on the quiet defiance of commanders who refused to accept weapon failures as inevitable. Their story deserves to be remembered not just as a tale of technological improvement, but as a testament to the power of individual judgment in the face of institutional denial. If you found this story compelling, share it so others will remember what courage really means, not just the physical bravery to face enemy fire, but the moral courage to challenge authority when lives hang in the balance.